Ordinarily, a day like today would be kind of an exciting day. You know, it's the release of mandate letters, a good news day for government, a recommitment to British Columbians of how we're going to ensure that we're growing our province's economy, that we're delivering services for them and their families, we're supporting them with affordability. The context, though, of today's release of mandate letters is different. Than a week away from the inauguration of President-elect Trump, who has made repeated declarations of economic war on Canada and British Columbia. This is a challenging thing. It is a serious threat, and we wanted to share with you our best information about what we understand this threat means for British Columbians in the context of a larger threat to our country of Canada. We know this will affect American families. It's going to increase their costs. It's going to make life more difficult for them, and it's going to cost them jobs. But as the Premier of British Columbia, I also want you to know how this will affect our province and what our province is doing to respond to that threat. The Minister of Finance and her team have been working since November 25th, when the threat was first made on the President's Truth Social network, to analyze how this will affect us and ensure that we are prepared as a province to respond comprehensively, effectively, and protect you and your families from this economic threat. So with that, I'd like to pass things over to the Finance Minister, who will brief you on the best information we have.
Thank you, Premier. On November 25th, President-elect Trump proposed tariffs of 25% on all Canadian and Mexican imports to the United States, and an additional 10% on imports from China, starting from the day he takes office. Across the board, tariffs would be unprecedented in modern times, which makes forecasting for such scenarios challenging. The Ministry of Finance has conducted a preliminary assessment of the potential impacts of such a scenario on BC's economy. To be clear, this does not represent the Ministry's budget forecast, which is still under development and will be publicly released as part of Budget 2025. The Ministry's preliminary assessment is based on internal planning assumptions, including the underlying assumption that a 25% U.S. tariff means it's in place for the duration of the Trump presidency, and that Canada retaliates with a similar level of tariffs. This assessment should be interpreted as one of many possibilities, as there's a great deal of uncertainty regarding the exact nature of the U.S. policies that may actually be implemented. The sources of uncertainty include the amount and scope of potential tariffs, the timing of announcement and implementation, whether other jurisdictions retaliate with tariffs of their own. Slide 2. Is a small open economy with a diversified economic structure and trade network. We sent around 54% of total merchandise exports to the U.S. in 2023, with China, Japan, and other nations, including Korea, making up the remaining 46% of exports. Wood, pulp and paper, metallic mineral, and energy products combined to make up around 67% of total goods exports. Our key commodity exports are, of course, softwood lumber, copper, natural gas, and coal. Our trade diversity helps shelter the economy from U.S. tariffs and enables the province to bolster trade with Asian markets. This is where BC's trade diversification helps set us apart from the rest of Canada, who are much more dependent on the U.S. as an export destination. For example, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec send over 75% of their goods exports to the U.S. However, U.S. remains our largest trading partner, and the proposed tariffs would have significant impacts for BC's economy. Slide 3. Here is a graph that shows the potential impact to BC's real GDP. It shows that in the tariff scenario, BC would experience an economic slowdown with real GDP potentially declining 0.6 year over year in both 2025 and 2026. Over the long term, this represents a cumulative loss of around $69 billion between 2025 and 2026. Next slide. This slide shows the potential impacts on BC jobs. It is estimated that there would be around 124,000 fewer jobs in BC compared to the base case by 2028. Job declines would be concentrated in export-oriented industries in the natural resource sector and associated manufacturing. This would include forestry, wood manufacturing, paper manufacturing, metal manufacturing, as well as in mining and oil and gas extraction. There would also be job losses in transportation and retail sectors. Slide 5. This slide shows the potential impact on BC businesses. Amidst higher cost pressures, investment would decline, and overall corporate profits would be lower. It is estimated that corporate profits would be $6.1 billion lower in 2025 and would still be $3.6 billion lower in 2028. Slide 6. To recap, here is a simple table outlining several of the key impacts of tariffs. We've already talked about GDP, jobs, and corporate profit impacts. Fewer jobs means that the unemployment rate will increase, of course. Our preliminary assessment shows that the unemployment rate would increase to 6.7% in 2025, compared to our base case of 5.8%. For 2026, the unemployment rate could increase to 7.1%. From a revenue perspective, a significant economic slowdown would affect many of the province's key revenue streams. Our preliminary assessment shows that this could have an annual revenue impact of between $1.6 billion and $2.5 billion, with the largest impacts expected for personal and corporate income tax. Again, this is just one range of possibilities and represents the Ministry of Finance high-level assessment of potential impacts. The assessment is based on internal planning assumptions, including that a 25% tariff would remain in place for the duration of the Trump presidency and that Canada retaliates. It looks at key economic indicators and inputs, including economic activity, trade, the labor market, and demographics. The analysis does not represent the Ministry of Finance economic and budget forecast, to be clear, which is under development and will be released as part of Budget 2025. We will continue to evaluate potential impacts as we move forward. I will be consulting with leading economists from across Canada later this month. Advice from the Economic Forecast Council will be reported in Budget 2025. As part of that, at the end of this month, I will meet with these leading economists from across the country for consultation on challenges facing the province, including this threat of tariffs. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Brenda. You can see Brenda and her team have been hard at work assessing the nature of these threats and the impact on BC families of the President-elect's stated intention. I think that for most of us, we hoped that when we saw that tweet in late November, that this was a passing fancy of the President and he would move on to another issue. What we have seen since then is a recommitment of the President to tariffs, in particular, most recently, his commitment to set up an office in order to collect these tariffs from Canada and other countries around the world. We take this threat very, very seriously. This is a direct economic threat to BC families. It is an attack on families in our province. It is an attack on Canadians. There are consequences for Americans as well that will also be devastating for them around affordability and loss of employment. It goes in both directions, but our commitment is to British Columbians, and our number one priority is ensuring that we are prepared as a province for these tariffs, that we are responding in a way that protects families and ensures that we minimize the risk of any future attack like this from the United States. This is the focus of the mandate letters that I have sent to each of my cabinet ministers, outlining to them a number of key steps that I want them to take as part of our overall provincial strategy to respond. In particular, I have asked every cabinet minister to review programs within their ministry to ensure that we are not wasting money on administration that should go to frontline services, to ensure that our programs that we have in place are responsive to this new global environment, that we are strengthening our provincial economy and focusing on growth so that we can support families with good paying jobs, even in this time of economic threat. There are three key parts to our response to these tariffs. The first is we will respond. We are fully supporting, as I did yesterday around the table with premiers, all tools available to the federal government to respond to the United States and retaliate against these unfair, unnecessary, unjustified, and costly tariffs for people across North America. As part of our response in British Columbia, we are reviewing non-tariff measures that may be available for British Columbia to reinforce how intertied we are between the United States and Canada and how our shared prosperity is on the line here. We will do that work in partnership with the federal government and with other provinces to ensure a coordinated Team Canada response. We will also be active participants in the trade mission, the tariff mission, to Washington, D.C., with all premiers to make our case directly to decision makers on Capitol Hill in the United States. And individual ministers, as well as myself, have been reaching out to our friends south of the border, and they are our friends. They are our family, people who we have worked with for years in Western states, governors, business leaders, to ensure that they understand the consequences of these decisions for their states, for their people, and for their economy. The second component of our response to this threat is to strengthen our provincial economy. You'll see that throughout the mandate letters. Accelerate permitting. Ensure that we are using our natural advantages, both as our position on the Pacific Ocean, but also as the home to critical minerals and metals that are needed around the world, to strengthen our economy and expedite our ability to get them out of the ground and to market in ways that support families. In addition, we are deepening our partnerships across Canada, currently working with the province of Alberta to remove internal trade barriers, first around wine, but also around electricity and energy. We will be pushing across Canada to remove internal trade barriers so we're stronger as a country. And perhaps we can turn this threat into an opportunity for all Canadians to increase our prosperity and reduce our dependence on the United States. The final piece of our response is to diversify. We will be supporting the federal government in efforts to partner with other affected countries around the world. These tariffs are proposed not just against Canada, but against countries around the world. We will partner with those countries and work with them to respond and also to deepen our relationships with them. We have trade relationships, strong trade relationships across the Pacific with many different countries, and this is an opportunity for us to deepen and strengthen those relationships and reduce our dependence on the United States. Look, I know right now the numbers that the finance minister laid out, the impact on British Columbia looks very scary for many families across British Columbia and across the country. But I firmly believe that we have everything that we need in this province to succeed. We have the people with the skills, we have the resources, we have the geography to take this threat and turn it into an opportunity to grow prosperity for everyone in this province and everybody in this country. British Columbia will lead the way in responding to these tariffs and ensuring that our people are protected, sharing this information with you, is not to scare you. It is to reassure you that we understand the gravity of the threat to you and to your family, that our government is focused to ensure that we are protecting you and that we are responding to this threat with everything that we have. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you for joining us. We have members of the media here in person as well as many members of the media on the phone line. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth between the two. For those on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue if you haven't already. We're going to begin today in the floor right here in person with Reagan Hasagawa from CTV News. Go ahead, Reagan.
Good morning, Premier. My first question for you is, you said yesterday that you support export and tariffs and bans on BC products in a potential trade war with the U.S. Would you support such measures on BC lumber specifically?
One of the things that I said to premiers around the table yesterday, and I would say to all Canadians, is the people of British Columbia will always be there to support our country. Our country is under direct threat by the President-elect of the United States. It is a declaration of economic war, in my opinion. And in wartime, people need to come together and support each other. Whatever it takes to ensure we get the attention of the Americans, that we remind them about how their prosperity is our prosperity. They have no better ally in the world. Whatever it takes, British Columbia will be there to make sure that we're doing our part. British Columbians have always been there. In times of actual war, right now, wildfires in LA, British Columbians are down there supporting Americans. We do our part. We will always do our part. And any business, any workers that are affected by retaliatory tariffs, we will ensure that the federal government and our government are working to support those workers so that they are not bearing the entire cost of what we need to do together to respond to this threat.
And Reagan, do you have a follow-up question?
Do you believe that Danielle Smith saying that she does not support export tariffs or bans on Alberta energy and goods reduces Canada's leverage in any negotiations with Donald Trump?
You know, Danielle's going to do what she needs to do what she believes she needs to do to protect the people of Alberta. What I know is that decisions around a response will come from the federal government, that I support any tools that are necessary to get the attention of the Americans, to focus their minds on the fact that this is going to cost all of us, and mutually assured destruction is no path to prosperity. And my hope is that as a Team Canada approach, we can recognize that we have differences and disagreements about which tactics we support and emphasize. But at the end of the day, we're all working together to protect this country and the beautiful people who live here.
Our next question will stay on the floor, going to Marcy Nicholson from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Marcy.
Good morning. You mentioned that BC is reviewing non-tariff tools. Can you give us some specific examples of that, other than you mentioned diversifying our markets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pretty careful in British Columbia to respect our trade agreements with the United States. The agreements are that we treat American products like Canadian products in terms of their availability in stores, in terms of how American goods travel through our province up to Alaska, in terms of how our forest companies work through BC timber sales to provide wood. In order to ensure that we're in compliance with trade agreements, we make a number of compromises that are to the benefit of the United States. Just visit a BC government liquor store. You'll see American products sitting side by side with Canadian products competing for British Columbia consumers. All of that is on the table in an atmosphere where the Americans are attacking BC families. Certainly, I imagine that many British Columbians and many Canadians will be reevaluating their travel plans to the United States when they reach out for a product at a grocery store, having a look at the back to see whether it's made in Canada or the United States, and making personal decisions accordingly. But for us as a province, we also make decisions. We allow American companies to bid on government contracts. We allow American alcohol products to sit side by side with BC products. We allow American trucks to travel through British Columbia to go up to Alaska to deliver goods without any charges. There are many ways that we work together. That's just a handful of examples. And all of that is on the table in a world where we are not working together, where we are under active attack by the Americans economically, and we'll make sure that we respond in kind.
And Marcy, do you have a follow-up question?
Are you not considering any tariffs at the moment, specifically softwood lumber?
The nature of our place in Confederation is that tariffs, export taxes, export bans, restrictions are in the hands of the federal government. It's helpful in the sense that it will ensure a unified approach across the country. It is unhelpful in a moment like this when the federal government is in some disarray. The premiers have stepped up into that leadership challenge. I'm hopeful now that things may have settled down a little bit at the federal level, that we're able to get back to the federal government playing that leadership role with other countries across the border in terms of security, and as well in relation to tariffs and the overall strategy related to retaliation using tariffs, export bans, and export taxes.
We're going to hop on the phone lines next with Richard Zussman from Global News. Go ahead, Richard.
Premier, thanks for taking my question. You've outlined some pretty crippling economic impacts here. You also mentioned that the government will do what it can to support workers who would be impacted by these crippling effects. In essence, how would you do that if we're seeing these profound losses in revenues coming into the coffers? And could the rebate you promised in the provincial election now be off the table in the upcoming budget because of these profound economic impacts that 25% tariffs have put in place?
Thanks, Richard. So part of our discussion with the federal government is for retaliatory measures where revenue is generated through tariffs that are placed on U.S. goods coming into Canada. That is, our expectation is that that revenue will be shared with workers and families who are affected by these tariffs generally. Just like during COVID, when we supported businesses, when we supported families that were affected by that, we will step up and we will make sure that businesses and families are supported. Part of the mandate letters that you see is about creating the space in our program so that we're able to respond quickly to this evolving situation. As you heard from the finance minister, it is very uncertain what this will actually look like. She and her team are doing the best to project what that means for our province. It is very hard to know. You know, for example, you look at the Tekmenko, the smelter in Kitimat that produces some of the lowest carbon aluminum in the world. The vast majority of that goes to the United States. They don't have the capacity in the United States to produce the aluminum that they need. When they place that 25% tariff on that aluminum, the Rio Tinto smelter, Rio Tinto can look to international markets. They have other markets where they can sell that aluminum. I'm not sure where that leaves the United States. When you look industry by industry, the effects of displacement to other markets or the effect of layoffs because there is no other market is very hard to predict. And so what we're needing to do is to be agile, to be able to respond quickly to support British Columbians as these effects materialize, to assume the worst, but hope for the best in terms of British Columbians and to prepare accordingly. In terms of the rebate, in terms of any government program, our number one priority right now is protecting BC families from this threat, ensuring that government's in a position to support people and to make sure that we're delivering on our commitment to British Columbians to protect them and support them in prosperity. And that's what we're going to do. This is a very serious matter, and it is our number one priority right now.
And Richard, do you have a follow-up question?
As you were aware, the relationship that we have with the United States is not an equal one. So you make some references to moving our products to other countries and other parts of the world, but that's challenging. Do you agree with the assessment that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre made this morning that because of decisions made by the federal government around pipelines, we haven't been able to properly move our oil products to markets in Europe? And in turn, are you worried about our inability to move products like aluminum to other markets outside of British Columbia because of decisions that have been made in the past around trading patterns and trading routes?
Well, this is some of what makes the impact of these tariffs so difficult to predict, Richard. Some products are readily substitutable for British Columbians, for Americans. Some markets are readily substitutable for some of the resources we produce. Some are not. And in terms of the simplification of the issue of pipelines, I know that the vast majority of the oil through the expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline has in fact gone to the American market. It has not gone to Asia. And so when we look at these kinds of things and we look at the impacts of additional pipeline capacity or other pieces like that, this is a complex and interconnected economy that we have with the United States and globally. Predicting what those moves will be and what they look like is incredibly hard to know at this point. But what I know is that by expediting our internal processes around the critical minerals that we know the world needs, that need will not go away because of this. By leveraging our position on the Pacific to access those global markets and supporting other provinces in accessing that, and by eliminating trade barriers across Canada, I know that we'll be able to strengthen our country and respond to this in a way that leaves us out the other end better off than we were. And that's our goal here in British Columbia, and I hope that's the goal of anybody who wants to sit in the Prime Minister's chair.
Our next question on the phone lines will come from Katie DeRosa, CBC News. Go ahead, Katie.
A bit further to that, suggestion of who might next sit in the Prime Minister's chair. Pierre Poilievre was in Vancouver and basically placed the blame at the feet of the federal government for not approving projects that would get our energy to those diversified markets that you're talking about. Do you think that's a fair characterization? And what is your response to Poilievre's promise that he would remove some of the red tape to get such energy products approved faster?
Well, I think that looking to a federal partner around supporting us in getting goods to market from British Columbia is a key priority of mine, and I would certainly welcome a federal partnership on that. I think Mr. Poilievre, it would be helpful to hear from him about his support for retaliatory tariffs, export taxes, and export bans to respond to the United States. There are different positions between Ontario and Alberta and British Columbia about what's best. For us, it's every measure, whatever it takes, let's do it. Let's get the Americans' attention. I stand with Doug Ford in saying that is the best path forward, and I support the federal government in doing that. I hope that if he is elected into the role of Prime Minister, that he would support that too. And I think that right now, the time is for us all to come together as Canadians to respond to the threat that is being placed on us by the President-elect, to say it is unacceptable. We will not stand for it. We'll fight like hell to protect our people. We'll stand with every other person in Canada to make sure we're protecting Canadians first. And I look forward to working with anyone that wants to take that approach.
And Katie, do you have a follow-up question?
With the potential, retaliatory tariffs and like you suggested, export ban on critical minerals, would that not, hurt those workers in those industries more than the tariffs that the U.S. is proposing? And would the support that you're pitching be enough to recover those losses?
Well, this needs to be a smart approach, Katie. We need to target those decision makers in the United States that have the capacity to speak to Mr. Trump about how intertied our economies are. As just one example, at the Teck smelter in Trail, British Columbia, they produce a metal that is essential for night vision goggles and military applications, electronics equipment in the United States. It's one of two critical metals that were banned, that China banned from export to the United States. If you don't get it from Teck in Trail, British Columbia, you don't get it. And so it's products like these that have the potential to remind Americans about how intertied our economies are. And it's things like were done in the previous trade dispute with the Americans, targeting orange juice to get the attention of the Floridians, targeting Jack Daniels to get attention to people in key states, swing states, Republican states that may otherwise be inclined to support these tariffs. We are all connected, regardless of political ideology, across North America and our economy, and being smart about these tariffs to minimize the impact on Canadians and British Columbians while maximizing the impact on Americans to get their attention, especially in those Republican states, is going to be critically important.
We're going to come back to the floor from a question from Graham Wood from Glacier Media. Go ahead, Graham.
Hi, Premier. Perhaps you could talk to me about the trade pie here and how you diversify. Who are you reaching out to, including Chinese officials, Do you plan to reach out to them or any other country specifically? And with regard to China, given their record with the WTO and international laws, are you wary about increasing your ties to that country?
Well, I mean, this is the big puzzle from my perspective about the actions of the Americans. They say that their dominant concern is China. It's the importation of precursor chemicals related to fentanyl, the buildup of military belligerence on the part of that country, as well as the dumping of products into the United States. I mean, what better ally is there to the United States in establishing critical mineral chains that are independent of China than Canada? What better partner is there to ensure that we're working closely in ensuring the energy is there around artificial intelligence, as well as any other priorities of the United States, than Canada? We're the #1 energy exporter to the United States. From British Columbia alone, electricity, petroleum products help fuel the United States. And so it's bizarre to me that we're having this conversation. It is solely to the benefit of China that the United States and Canada are feuding. And so if we can help deliver that message to the president-elect, to the Republicans, then I think we'll be able to really reinforce how we're actually allies in this challenging global environment that we live in.
And Graham, do you have a follow-up question?
Again, just to reiterate that, and then I'll follow up. If you could specifically speak to how that pie will be divided, like what countries are you targeting, including China? And then actually, just the follow up would be, can you maybe hash out a bit more in details about the interprovincial trade barriers? Because National Bank came out with a report saying that it's equivalent to 21% tariff by the U.S. How difficult is that to break down those interprovincial borders? But yeah, the first thing about China.
Yeah, so as Premier of British Columbia, I see two challenges for us in relation to trade. We are dependent on two countries that right now are in intense disagreement between each other, and as well are in positions and conducting themselves in ways that are causing concern globally, the United States and China. And so for my job as Premier, to diversify our trade so that we are less reliant on those two huge countries, and that we're deepening our partnerships with countries like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, countries, Vietnam, countries across the Pacific, including India, that we're finding ways to work together to diversify that trade relationship so we're less dependent on these two countries that clearly right now are a source of some of the global instability that we're seeing. We're going to be better off as British Columbians. In terms of the second part of your question, Graham, just remind me. Oh, right, yeah. So, you know, it's interesting. At the Premier's discussion yesterday, there was broad support around the table for us to work on internal trade barriers between our provinces. It means allowing goods to travel freely between provinces. We recently signed a very small agreement with Alberta allowing direct-to-consumer wine sales. It's not earth-shaking, but it results in economic growth for BC, as well as tax revenue for Alberta. It's a win-win for both provinces. We found a path forward, and it's opened up the door for us to have serious discussions about energy, about electricity, and about how we work together in a more coordinated way. This is the potential across the country to deepen that coordination with our neighbors across Canada, and I believe that that could ensure that we come out the other end of this threat better off than we entered into it.
Our next question will come from Jen St. Dennis from the Tyee. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks. This question can be for the Premier or for the Finance Minister. I haven't heard from you in a bit. I'm just wondering about, Premier Ford has been really specific about targeting energy as a possible energy embargo. I'm just curious, like we do export energy to the United States. Does BC fit into that threat?
So one of the unique things about British Columbia is that we are, well, not unique. One of the things that people often overlook about British Columbia is that we are a significant energy exporter to the United States. It takes the form of electricity, natural gas, and petroleum products. Without these products, Americans pay significantly more for electricity if they are able to access it. They pay significantly more at the pump, and they'll pay significantly more for industrial users of natural gas, having knock-on effects for consumers in that country. Alberta is in a similar position, obviously more focused on oil and gas, and Ontario and Quebec also export electricity to the United States. The failure of the president-elect to appreciate the fact that these exports create American jobs, reduce costs for Americans, and also have the benefit of increasing prosperity in Canada as well, is extremely unusual to me. I don't understand why Americans would force themselves to pay 25% more in tax on energy imports from Canada. It makes absolutely no sense. And it is my hope that that alone will cause a reckoning in the United States and a revisiting of this strategy as a whole. But if it is not, I do support discussions around how we distribute our electricity. We don't have to sell electricity to the United States. We can sell it to Alberta. We can use it for other purposes domestically in British Columbia. We can intertie with the Yukon, and we don't have to do these things. The consequences, though, for everyday Americans could be quite significant down the west coast of the United States. I believe that we save California from significant power outages as a result of our provision of power during peak periods. Why the Americans wouldn't take that seriously, I'm not sure. But in any event, we can help them understand the role that we play in energy security for them. And unfortunately, we'll be forced into that position of demonstrating that to them.
And Jen, do you have a follow-up question?
You've mentioned several times discussing with Alberta strengthening electricity exports. In the past, they've not been super into that conversation. Are you hopeful that that's going to change, and have you been starting conversations?
I am hopeful. The Minister for Energy, Adrian Dix, has been in contact with and has been over to Alberta to advance those conversations. The conversations grew out of early conversations we had about wine, and the positive results that I think both Premier Smith and I felt came from that conversation, and the willingness that they have to work with us on that. Certainly, I'm happy to reciprocate. I believe that Canadians in Alberta, in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, that we need to be working with Canadians right across the country to strengthen our national economy as well as our respective provincial economies.
We are over time, but we can try and squeeze in a couple more questions. First from Jack Morris from City News. Go ahead, Jack.
Hi, David. You used a lot of imagery and language here, talking about warfare and attacks and things like that. Why would you say that it is appropriate to use that kind of imagery of war when you're discussing this potential tariff situation?
You know, it's important for British Columbians to know that we understand that if you lose your job and you lose your home and your community is devastated, that it doesn't matter whether it's because a bomb dropped or because somebody issued a tariff that shut down the local employer. The effect on you and your family is the same. We take this deadly seriously. In terms of the impact on somebody that loses their job, and our projections are that we're foregoing more than 100,000 jobs and people actively losing employment in this province as a result of these tariffs. I want people to know that we're going to do everything we can to do two things. One is to respond and to make sure that people who are inflicting this on us, that they feel it back and they get the message about how important it is that we work together, not at odds, but also that we're going to be there for them, that we're going to structure government in a way to respond to this new reality, that we understand it's a new reality, and we're going to make sure we deliver for them. And so it is serious language, but this is a very serious situation for our province.
And Jack, do you have a follow-up question?
You've talked a lot about the options that you're exploring in regards to this, but what do you think is the one most powerful tool you have as the Premier of BC to have an impact in this upcoming trade dispute?
You know, it's not going to grab a headline, but the number one most effective strategy that I think British Columbia can deploy, and it's not unique to us, it's consistent for every Canadian and every province and every territory and every government leader, is to reach out to the Americans to help them understand. I think that for many Americans, you know, they look at Donald Trump and they say, "Oh, you can't take him seriously. He's just, you know, he's talking about how to increase economic activity in our country." We disagree with him, but it's not. This is real, and this reality will have significant impacts on the daily lives of Americans in terms of increased costs and in terms of loss of employment and consequences for them in their communities right across the country. And so that tool of reaching out to friends and family and business connections and fellow union members and fellow governmental officials in the United States and delivering that message that we are allies, not enemies, that we are partners in the shared work of increasing prosperity, that we are tied together and we're family and friends, that is our most effective tool, because that will result in messages being delivered to the president-elect. And just like last time, I hope it will result in, if tariffs are imposed, a very short duration of tariffs before we can get back to actually talking about what matters.
We'll finish up on the phone line. We have a lot of questions we weren't able to get to, so apologies. Rob Shaw from Czech News, go ahead.
Hey, Premier, is the purpose of this spending review in the mandate letters to cut spending to kind of bridge the gap here in the loss of revenue from the United States, or what is the goals of the spending review? Do you have a number, or what's the purpose?
So the efficiency rule, the efficiency review was something that we've needed to do independent of any tariff threat. And we've been in government for 7 years. The situation in BC in 2025 is not the same as it was in 2017. Having a look at all of our programs, making sure that they're delivering what we expect for British Columbians, and that they're keeping up with the challenges that we face now as opposed to the challenges we may have faced 3 or 4 years ago. Things are moving so quickly. We don't want to spend money on administration. We want to spend money on frontline services that actually make a difference for British Columbians. So that is the core purpose of that review. It takes on a deeper significance in the context of the tariff threat, and it brings a greater urgency, and it also puts a different lens on the programs that we have. The programs that we have on November 24th may have made a lot of sense. On November 26th, they may suddenly take on a different character where we can't rely on the U.S. as a close friend, ally, and partner in prosperity. And so that review now takes on a deeper importance. It takes on a different angle, and it results in us orienting towards what could be a protracted trade war with the United States that results in losses on both sides, economic as well as employment, and is completely unnecessary. But I can tell you on the other side, British Columbia will come out stronger, we will come out more prosperous, and we will come out more independent of the United States regardless of what happens, because this is a good reminder to us that the Americans will not always be there for us, and we can't always count on them. We got to count on ourselves.
And Rob, do you have a follow-up question?
Just to follow Richard's question, it sounds like from your answer that you're considering, or at least not ruling out, delaying or canceling the rebate. And I just want to follow up on that, given it was a major focus of the election, given you've been talking about it quite a bit since the election, when are people going to know if that is on the chopping block as a result of what's happening in the United States? And what does the timeline look for that now?
Our number one priority is ensuring that we're protecting British Columbians from this threat, that we're orienting the provincial government, all of the tools that we have towards supporting families and businesses that may be affected by tariffs that could be coming in as soon as less than a week from now when the president-elect is sworn in. That is our number one priority. The finance minister is preparing her budget. She is taking into account all of the uncertainty that is there in terms of the intentions of the Americans. And we may have an answer the day after the president is sworn in terms of what his direction is. And my direction to her and to every minister is to ensure that we are oriented to protect British Columbians in this new reality, ensure that we are responsive to the reality of British Columbian families now, and so we're making sure that everything is being looked at.
And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thanks very much.